Welcome back to another episode of Projecting Grandeur. I'm your host, Ron Dichter. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being here. Appreciate all the support that I've had. And for those of you that have messaged me or emailed me suggesting topics, I'm trying to weave some of those in there. So thanks for the feedback. It's much appreciated. Today I want to talk about manual transmission cars. Why? Why do I want to talk about this? Well, ever since I was 14, which is the age you can get your learner's permit in Alaska, I have driven a manual transmission car. It was my car I learned on. It was the car that I was first given to drive, and my first car that I ever bought for myself was a manual transmission. To this day, don't get me wrong, I'm in an electric car right now, but I have still manual transmission cars in my life. While they might not be my daily driver, I do still believe wholeheartedly in the manual transmission and think that it is a skill everybody should learn. So much that both of my kids, who are now, at least at the time of this video, 19 and 20 years old, they wanted cars when they were 16, and I said, great. Other than the other requirements of grades and things like that, I said, if Dad's going to buy you a car, Mom and Dad have one rule. And that is that car will be a stick shift. In fact, when I met my wife, she drove a stick shift. So we are just a stick shift driving family. And everyone in my family knows how to drive it. Both my kids' first cars were stick shifts. I think my son still today drives a stick shift, even though my daughter has moved over to an auto. But the point of today's episode is not about my affinity for stick shift cars. The point today is really about the lesson learned from a stick shift car. And if you think back, for those of you that are old enough, to the early manual transmission cars, and maybe even, there might even be something before this, but as far as I can remember back, it was a 4-speed car. You had reverse, first, second, third gear. And then, they changed the way the gearing and the transmission worked, and it allowed for a 4 speeds plus reverse, and then a 5-speed. And when a 5-speed came out, you even hear that term, oh, it's a 5-speed. Like, that's a very standard term for a manual transmission. And everybody thought, wow, if you get into 5th gear, that's going to, equate to the top speed that you can get to. And then something happened. Somebody said, well, what if we changed again, I'm not an engineer here, but the torque, the way that the transmission and the gearing works, and what if we could allow for an even higher gear so that a car could even go faster at lower RPMs, and then became the onset of the 6-speed. And when the 6-speed came out, that was like, wow, you had 5 speeds plus reverse. Like, that was a big deal. And then after that, somebody said, well, what if you could have another gear? And then came 6 speeds, which became the norm, for a long time, where you had 6 speeds that you could get to, and when you got into 6th gear, you were flying down the highway. And for the longest time, that was like the pinnacle of as good as you can get. But then things changed, and some of the sports car brands said, what if we change the torquing, the ratios a little bit further? And what if we can actually have 7 speeds of forward and a reverse, making it an 8-speed car? And that is what happened. You had some higher end sports cars that found a new gear. And so the point I want to bring up today is to illustrate that we only know what we're capable of by the guards, or the ceilings, if you will, that we put on ourselves. And so if you're in your business thinking you are just busting your butt, and you're working as hard as you possibly can be, that might be true, right up until you find a new gear, right up until you find a new level that you can get to. And it isn't, you can't just say, I'm going to go find this gear, right? I mean, sure, some of that is going to be fortitude inside of you. Some of it's going to be drive. Some of it's going to be, that push that you have to get to that next level. But other parts of it are discovering something that you didn't know, right? So when engineers said, oh, we can go from a 3-speed to a 4-speed, and a 4 to a 5, and a 5 to 6, and so on, like, they didn't just say that and add a gear, right? They had to change the way that the gearings work, the the sprockets. Again, I'm not an engineer here, but they had to change the way things work so that you can actually achieve that higher gear. And so as you're going through, your business and your life, and you're, kind of walking through the motions of what you do on a daily basis, you need to start asking yourself, like, what can I do to find a new gear, right? Once you find the gear, then you got to figure out how to get into that gear. But in order to get into that gear, you got to know it exists. And so this goes back to a lot of the things I've been talking about, where, you have to be objective in your business. You have to be willing to look at process, be willing to look at product, be willing to look at distribution, and figure out, are there different ways in which I can operate that allow me to unlock a gear that may not exist right now? Are there things that I can do in my business right now that will change the way that my business fundamentally works because I found a new gear? And being objective, being really, going back, I think it was probably 10 or 12 episodes ago, where I talked about, being able to look at things from a higher elevation so that you're not always on street view. And sometimes you have to work, on the business as opposed to in the business. Those things allow you to discover new ways, new opportunities, new things that you can do within your existing business that don't fundamentally change the business. They just change the way that you work in the business. Whether it's an efficiency, whether it's you tap into a new distribution model, whether it's a product feature that unlocks a new market, like all of these are the things that ultimately are going to help you figure out how to become, the most efficient, the most structured, way that you can, so that you can unlock those new gears. And once you find that new gear, like finding it, that's half the battle, then you got to know how to put it in that gear. And oftentimes what that means is that you're probably going to have to work harder. You're probably going to have to work more hours. You're probably going to have to spend the same time that you did into grinding to figuring out your current business, to figuring out how to get your current business to work in that new gear that you've just discovered, right? Because maybe you know how to operate in fourth gear right now, but fourth gear might be only, the best that you are at this moment in time, but you now just moved yourself up to 30,000 feet. You've started to look at the business from a different lens, and it's allowed you to discover that a fifth gear can be there if you make these 4 tweaks, right? So now you have to figure out how to make those 4 tweaks to unlock that gear, and then you got to figure out the work it takes to get into it, right? So it's very much like starting over at some point, where you're learning how to kind of elevate that business to the next level. And you hear this all the time, where people talk about, plateaus that their business gets in. They talk about how, they were able to grow the business to X volume, but they haven't been able to scale it past then. That's because they haven't unlocked the next gear. If you've redlined everything that you can do in fourth gear, you can't get bigger, you can't get stronger, you can't get more out of it, because you're stuck doing the best you can in this gear. And so by finding that fifth gear, that's how you unlock that potential, to grow and reach, past that plateau. So my advice to everybody out there is really twofold. Number one, recognize where you are at in your current business. Recognize what gear you're in. Recognize, am I redlining my current gear? That's the first thing. Am I doing everything that I can in my current gear to maximize, the potential of the business today? And if the answer to that is no, well, you got to redline the current gear before you start worrying about finding another gear. And if the answer to that is yes, well, then you need to be able to take yourself out of the day-to-day so that you can focus on figuring out what that next gear is that you didn't know existed, because you're going to look at different efficiencies in the business, you're going to look at different processes, you're going to look at new features that are going to unlock potential, new distribution models, and it's going to allow you to spend that time focused on getting to that next gear. So be aware, redline where you're at. Once you redline, figure out how to unlock a new gear. Once you figure out how to unlock it, then you got to figure out how to put it in, and the work and the grind it's going to take to figure out what it's like to operate in that gear, and that will help you continue to grow. You are setting your own boundaries. You are setting your own limitations. If you have 4 gears today and you get to 5, that doesn't mean 5 is your cap. Again, get it to redline, figure out what that next gear looks like, and then figure out the effort and work it's going to take to get it into that gear, and then go until you redline again, and that's how you keep climbing over those plateaus. So I hope you find this helpful. Please remember to like and comment, and most importantly, share. share with people who you think would benefit from this, and continue. If you have some great topics you'd like me to cover or guests that you'd like me to interview, don't hesitate to DM or email me. Have a great day, everyone.